Good morning, everybody. Today is a maintenance day. Had a great time yesterday clearing on a lot for an investor, and we just did a little bit of damage to our mulching head. Nothing major at all, mostly just cosmetic more than anything, but a little bit of function. So I'm going to show you guys today how to get into the front cover of the FMX 36 mulching head, and also the top cover, which is where the hydraulic motor is housed. You'll need sockets. The first repair we're going to make, which is one I have to do just about every time because I'm bad to, like if I'm working around a house, I'll position this side of the head between the house and the tree, and I'll push the tree with this side because pushing here will push it away from the house, but it'll also bend the tree over. So once it finally moves far enough to cut the tree, it snaps the tree off and I can throw it away from the house, but naturally that causes some warpage. So first thing I do, this lip gets a little bit bent every time, especially on the ends, because for some reason they didn't weld the tips. So what I'm going to do is just take my little mini sledgehammer, and I'm just going to hammer this out straight. If you take these bolts out before you hammer that straight, it is a bear to get it to line back up. So we'll get that done, and then we'll lay this side down a little bit flat and hammer it out. Sometime this winter, which you always hear me talk about doing my maintenance in the winter time, it's because things are slow and I need stuff to do. So that's the best time to do little projects and build some modifications. So I'm just going to hammer this out, and we'll check the inside of the motor housing. Now right here you've got 3 9/16 bolts. The nuts are welded to this underside, so you don't have to worry about them just dropping, and you don't have to worry about having a 9/16 wrench to hold that. It's easy as just having your 9/16 socket and pulling these 3 out, and you have 3 right here. So we'll take all 6 of those out, and then that top cover, really there's nothing special to it. It just lifts straight off. I used to be a welder. That was, you know, I worked in a metal shop, so luckily I've got a little bit of background in how to make sure metal lines back up easily when you're working on it like this. And one thing I do for sure is once I get all the bolts out and all the metal is loose and relaxed, I look and I see if the holes are lined up. And if they're not, that gives me a good indication, idea of how I need to hammer this thing out to get it to line back up. Another thing to note is you probably noticed that those bolts on this back side went straight in because the sheet metal goes straight down. So you don't have a problem there, whereas the problem here is that these 2 pieces come out like this and there's a seam. So if you press against wood, wood tends to get mashed in there just like that, and for some reason, it being the shape that it is that wood is always at a taper, which means it wedges itself in and forces this stuff apart. So that's something to keep in mind, and one thing I look at also when I'm taking this thing apart. Okay, so make sure you put your bolts somewhere they're not going to roll away, especially if you're having to do this out in the woods. Because if you're in the woods and you drop a bolt, as soon as you realize you dropped it, don't try to watch the bolt. Just look straight at the ground and watch for the leaf movement and the sound of it, because you're not going to be able to follow a bolt falling through the air hardly. Okay, we got a little bit of wood in here, not a whole lot. One thing we need to do is clean this out, all that junk, because you can run these things in the rain. You can see this thing's gusseted, so it's pretty stout, but it did get a little bit of a crease right here, so we're gonna have to hammer that out. but you want to keep the inside of this thing fairly clean. There's weep holes, 3 weep holes on this side, drilled straight through the bottom. Let me just show you. And that's for when water gets in this case, it can get out. You don't want water just sitting in here, because obviously that, you know, once this paint starts eventually cracking, I think these are actually powder coated, so it'll last a lot longer than paint. But eventually it will give somewhere. There'll be a fine crack, and if water is allowed to sit in here, it's going to start rotting away at your head. And after you spent $20,000 on one of these, you probably want it to last a good long time. I see just a little bit of evidence of hydraulic oil seepage, but certainly no puddling or dripping like that. I'm going to take this and I'm going to wash this out, because heat is your enemy. Anytime you got moving parts, and you know, well, that's pretty much it. Anytime you got moving parts, heat is the enemy, and that's why we've got 3 grease fittings on this head. 1 in each end for the bearings, and then there's a grease fitting right here for the motor gear. So we want to keep this clean. Any dust on here, and that's pretty thick, that's just pretty much sawdust, holds heat, and it's not going to let it, you know, cool at a steady pace, increasing your chances of cracking. These aren't really bad to crack out, but you know, not that I've seen in my research. So I'm going to unload this excavator, drive it up there and wash this case out real good, and get the motor and the valve. I think that's the valve body right here, I guess is what it would be called. Anything in here is important. It's important to the function of this head. So I'm going to clean all this stuff out, and we'll be right back. Maybe I overkill this a little bit, maybe not, and I'm not saying that this is exactly a tutorial, but I do things that kind of make sense to me. Number one, if there's dirty grease or grit or anything around this grease fitting, I'll just wipe it as clean as I can get it. And then since I carry this in the machine with me, it tends to get nasty stuff inside the tip of my grease gun. So that first little bit of grease, I'll just squeeze it out and just wipe it off on a tooth. And also, on a grease gun, the tip of it, you know, you got the threaded part that threads onto the tube, but this very tip, actually, some of them, you unscrew and it'll accommodate different size grease fittings. So if you've ever gotten a grease gun on a fitting and you just have to jerk and pull to get it off, most time, even when it's on there, you can just loosen that collar and it'll come right off. The other thing about a grease fitting is if it's adjusted properly, you shouldn't be able to just pull it straight off. Usually it's just one tube. You wiggle it one way, the other way. All right, so now I'm gonna reach here, and once I get it seated, I'll give it one squeeze, and then I'll turn this drum a quarter turn. And that's not necessarily for this, because this isn't really, you know, spinning that much right now. But like on your fittings that go to the bearings in the ends of the drum, that's how I'll do it. This one, more or less, you can just kind of, I would run out of grease right now, wouldn't I? Let's see if I can just pull them back. Such is life, folks. Such is life. Usually, a lot of times, even when you run out of grease, you can pull that plunger back out and do it again, and you can get a little bit more grease out of it. Not today. I don't know why I would run out of grease at such an inopportune time. So, there's nothing to do but run to the store, get some more grease. Well, you know, that happens. get right ready to do something and you run out of grease every time. But that's all right. It gave me an opportunity to do a video on how to change the tube out on this grease gun, because I know my first time trying to change the tube on one of these was an absolute disaster. So anyway, as I was saying, what I do is you can just put that on there, and 1, 2, 3, 4. That should be plenty enough grease for that joint. They told me, the folks that I bought this unit from, I really only needed to grease this thing like every 20 hours or so on the inside. But now the end grease fittings that grease the bearings, which we're going to tear into this next, I do them about every 4 hours, especially if I'm really working it hard. So I'm going to put the cover back on here. I got all this cleaned out real nice. Put the cover back on here, and then we're going to open this end plate up and check everything in there. Well, I was getting ready to put that cover back on, and then I remembered that I got a little bit of warpage. You can see that that end is flat. This end's got a real nice bend in it. So, an easy way to fix sheet metal. Number 1, find you a good solid flat surface to straighten him out, and the straight surface has got to be stronger than the metal you're getting ready to work, obviously. Another thing, this stuff's powder coated and I don't really want to mess that up, and I don't have any shop cloths, but you need something that's going to be able to slide on that metal. Otherwise, that's where your real bad scratching is going to start. We're probably going to scratch this anyway, but you just lay some cloth or a shop towel down or something like that, and then one might think that you want to put this down like that. You don't. Wherever it's curved, you want to flip that over and put it down on your flat surface to where that radius is over top of the flat, and then you just strike your metal starting closest, and I know you guys can't really see that, but I'm going to start striking from the flat spot and work my way out to the worst bent area, and that way you're going to relieve the stress on that metal. And you can use a rubber mallet for this, or that's the ideal thing if you don't want to mess up your paint. But I'm just going to drop some towels on here and just try to hit it flat, just real quick, abrupt hammering motion. Out. We'll just relieve that stress as we go. Kind of a tight fit in here. Just going to get it close to the edge here. Just take your time. Essentially, some call this peening the metal. That's actually come out pretty nice. You can see we got it pretty well straightened up. I'm going to work on this just a little bit more because I'm pretty picky about it, but you can see that really straightened that sucker out. I had to right here hit it at kind of the edge of my hammer, so it dented that metal just a little bit. What I'm going to do, actually, I'll just show you how to do this. I'm going to line that up flat. Put my cloth there. And I'm going to try to strike the plate flat. Let's take a look at it here. Oh yeah. Not bad. Straight as it can be. So we'll replace that cover, and then we'll pull that front cover off. I took all of these bolts out, and I always leave these top 2 bolts on till last, because essentially it's just like an extra set of hands holding this thing up. Need all the help I can get when you work alone. Now this has got a lip around it, so all I've got to do is press in on it, take this last bolt out. I kind of push in and up to keep pressure off the threads of that bolt so it doesn't mess them up. And then you just kind of hold it down here and push in on the bottom, and that plate will just kind of lean out. Okay, well, the main reason that we're taking this off is because of this. This little thin piece of sheet metal is all that's plugging where it says Fecon. Fecon's been cut out with either plasma or laser. And you can see where when a stick pushed in on that and broke it loose, this right here was rubbing it. And that is no bueno, so that's something we're gonna have to hammer back out. Yeah, I guess it's probably good that. I mean, it's not really good that happened. But I try to get in here every time that I maintenance everything else, because we got standing water down in here. Pine needles. This junk has gotten in here and clogged up the weep hole, the drain hole that lets the water out. So we gotta get this sucker clean. I can't even see where the weep hole is at the moment. So I'm gonna get my screwdriver and I'm gonna find that weep hole and get this draining. I was kind of surprised, but it does make sense that there's actually not a weep hole in here. When I broke those bolts loose, I guess water was coming out and running around the bottom, making it look like it had a weep hole. But it does make sense that they've got this sealed to where water can't get in, to keep from getting inside of these bearings and parts. But the problem is that when that little piece of sheet metal got pushed in, and it was raining when that happened, water got into here, which doesn't look like it did any damage. Everything's powder coated and painted. Just a little surface rust around that weight. But with water got in, there was no way for it to get out. So that's the only downfall to not having a weep hole. So what I've done is I've just taken my screwdriver, and I haven't rubbed and ground the paint off or anything, but I just ran around this rim to get all that wood debris and dust out of my way. Got it really good and clean. So, and I've wiped all this out. I didn't want to spray parts cleaner or anything in there. Just wiped it clean. Everything fell down in the bottom. I cleaned that out. So now let's move over and fix the back of that cover. And I'm sure we can just duct tape around the inside of that little piece of sheet metal to keep water from getting back in here. And this will be easy enough. We're just going to do like we did before. I ended up having to use my paper towels to soak that water out of there. So this cover's tough. I don't think I'm going to need to cover this as much. Except where I'm going to be. Actually, I'm not going to do that. I want this whole thing to be consistent, so I don't warp that cover. That cover is probably 3/16 steel, so it would take some hammering to mess it up. And what we have here is this piece right here, this black piece is riveted. So maybe this winter what I'll do is I'll drill those to get a rivet out. It's actually easy. You just take a drill bit that's about halfway between the size of the hole and the cap of that rivet and the outside edge, and you just drill into it and that rivet will fall out. So we got a good flat workstation here, and what I'm going to do, if I went to hammering this, it would get against this rivet and just warp all the pieces. So what we got to do is lift him up just like that. And what I'm going to do is take my vice grips, and I'm actually going to lift up on this, And I'm gonna give that sheet metal something with that radius of those vice grips. It'll be able to slide as I hammer this out. And I'm not too concerned about, and it only bent back to these 2 rivets. So we're just gonna make striking blows at an angle to straighten that metal out. Progress. And what you guys, I don't know if y'all can see it, but essentially there's a wave. It goes up and then it bends down. I'm striking that wave. And let's see if I can just do it a time or two so y'all can see it. I don't know if I got y'all focused in right here. Maybe that's good. I'm gonna pull up on this a little and I'm just gonna strike right on that wave. See that wave coming out? Just like that. And now that I've got this folded up, I can take my vice grips loose. And I'm actually gonna hold that. And that way I can feel the spring in the metal. And wherever there's spring, that's where I need to strike it. Don't hit your thumb. That hurts. Okay. So we got that. What I want to do is make sure we're lining back up with the rivets where they were at. What I could do is go get some itty bitty screws to screw this in. Yep. What I'm going to actually do is take this corner and bend it up. The good thing about sheet metal, you can twist it back and forth a couple of times and break a corner right off, because we don't need them. They're not doing us any good at this point. Alrighty. So I'm going to work on this a little bit, get this hammered out, and I'll get you guys back in once I got it a little bit straighter. Excuse me. Instead of having to drill these back out, what I've devised is to get metal to go back straight, you actually have to bend it past where you want it to be. And since we're fastening to a plate, we can't really do that just hammering it. So what I've done is take this cloth, and what it does is you push it into here until you hit a radius. And what you have to do is strike that plate right here. And this cloth will cushion and let you push that plate past that bend point, and this edge of the cloth will actually provide a radius for that metal to bend a little bit. So what we're doing is starting in as tight as we can, and I'm hammering to where the hammer strikes right past the edge of this cloth all the way across. And then I'll stop, move my cloth out a little bit, and all this while I'm holding this down. And essentially we're just going to inch our way back out. Okay, so now that I've worked my way almost all the way out, I'm actually going to pull this back, and I'm going to strike this plate on this side to make that plate curl down a little bit. Okay, so this certainly is not the most perfect or forever fix, but I've actually, when I had it raised up, I hammered it in the middle. So now we should be able to hammer out toward these edges and get that smooth. All right, we got her hammered out good and smooth. Now we're just going to do a little bit of waterproofing here. America's favorite plastic chrome duct tape. Now we've gotten this thing back in ship shape, and I know that because even though it's kind of rough looking, this is flat against the 3/16 plate. So we know that we've got the original clearance that we did. This was hammered out. This was hammered out smooth. So now all I got to do is mount this thing back up, and we'll fire it up and get the head spinning and make sure we don't hear any rubbing. All right, we are solid. No more rubbish. We got that thing sealed off. We don't even have sharpened teeth today. We only hit this one tooth yesterday and it really didn't damage it too bad. So thank goodness, because I mean it is hot today. Hot, hot, hot. If you can't tell, I'm not big on heat. I'm definitely a winter person. So appreciate you guys joining me today. It's been a fun little project, doing a little bit of maintenance. Definitely enjoying this attachment. I'd recommend Fecon. Obviously I'm not paid to do this, but Fecon seems to be a good company. So hopefully you guys join me on the next video, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be the one where we reveal the new piece of equipment that we've got coming in. So you guys have a great day. Go out, get on a piece of machinery, and have some fun. We'll see you on the next one.